Okay, well, welcome everyone. Again, my name is Lucy. I'm with Cal Nonprofits, and this is the California Venues Grant Program webinar where we'll talk about eligibility for the program and how you can apply. Encourage you to apply. I am going to turn it over now to our CEO of Cal Nonprofits, Jan Masaoka.
Thanks, Lucy. That was not just Lucy Salcedo Carter. She's also our policy director and will be moderating the part of the session later on today. So thanks, Lucy. So just a word about us at California Association of Nonprofits. We say Cal Nonprofits are short. We have 10,000 nonprofit members, and we're mainly a policy organization. And I think something that's very much related to this is an example of this. So we just worked on getting a bill passed, creating a bill and then getting it passed that regulates crowdfunding platforms like PayPal and GoFundMe and Network for Good and Amazon Smile and all of those. And I think a lot of us have sort of taken for granted that when we make a donation through those platforms that we have confidence in it's going to get out to nonprofits. But in fact, that hasn't always been happening. And so we've been very proud to be supporting this legislation. And I think it's a great example of what we call policy work that is high impact but low profile, because there's like nothing less profile than changing some reporting requirements based on some obscure forms. But in fact, that bill is going to help protect every single nonprofit in California and every single person who makes a donation to a California nonprofit. So we're very happy about that, and we were part of helping make sure that relief programs like this one were available to nonprofit organizations as well as to small businesses. Um, so one of the things we do is we help, in addition to help advocate for funding, we also help nonprofits access that funding, and this is kind of a perfect example of this. So we help nonprofits work with government, whether that's complying with regulations, getting money, or sometimes, banging on dishes and saying, you got to change this regulation. So this particular program, we are what's called an application partner. We will help everybody, regardless of whether you're a Cal Nonprofits member or not. But just so you know that, we don't have any say in who actually gets grants, but we are kind of have a commission, if you will, a mission to help nonprofits understand how it works, and make sure that you give yourself every single advantage in being sure in getting this kind of funding. Um, there's three things I want to make sure that you kind of get about this. So first is we all need to get the word out to everybody. This program has not gotten the publicity that some other relief programs have. We know there are a lot of people that haven't heard about it yet. So I'm hoping that one of the things you will do is reach out to at least one other performance venue that you can think of and say, just making sure that you heard about this program, because there are millions of dollars that are going to be given out to thousands of organizations here. So we really need to help. All of us need to get the word out. The second thing I want us to be sure to state is that the guidance or the rules for how the various questions get interpreted, they can get changed. So you need to kind of listen to what we talk about today, but also be aware of that things might change. So you can keep looking at our revised FAQs, which we revise. Sometimes it feels like every 15 minutes on our website, but it's probably not quite that often. But just be aware of that. And the third thing is, I think we want to make sure that all of you think about applying, so that if don't be, this isn't one of those things like where, if 10,000 people apply for a grant from Google or somebody and 3 people get it. Okay, we expect really a large number of nonprofits to get this. So give yourself a chance and apply, even if you're not completely sure that you're eligible or not. So I want to introduce the wonderful Sue Siegler, who's going to be doing a presentation, and then Lucy's going to be interrupting her once in a while with questions. And we're also very lucky to have here 2 people from Lendistry, which is the financial services firm based in Los Angeles that the California state government has contracted with to do the actual software and management and distribution of the grant. So we're very happy to have them here. And we also have a special guest, which is Tara from the California Californians for the Arts, and we in CFTA have worked together on just $1 million relief packages for nonprofits. So we're especially glad to have these people as well. Okay, so remember, put your questions in the chat, and you'll see that you'll get marked. Things like Lucy will mark that it will be answered live. Okay, thanks. Take it away, Sue.
And
Thank
questions in the Q&A, not the chat, please.
you.
You.
All right, here we go. Thank you, Jan. So as you can see, we've got the website address up there, cavenuesgrant.com. You will hear me referring to that a lot during the presentation. We strongly recommend that everybody go take a look through that website. The grant guidelines and eligibility are summarized on the homepage, and there is also a very detailed application guide available there as well. There's way too many things for us to go through in the space that we have available today. We're going to highlight the most important ones, but I do really encourage everyone to read through the application guide. As Jan mentioned, there are millions of dollars available in this program, $150 million to be precise. And so I want to echo what Jan said, that we encourage everyone to apply. If you think you're close or not quite sure, please go ahead and apply, because also, as Jan mentioned, our guidance is shifting at times. And so you might just be able to get a grant. We'll be focusing on nonprofits today, and we'll be taking your questions, as we mentioned. Don't forget to enter them into the Q&A box, and thanks to Lucy, who'll be monitoring that. And I'll mention that at cavenuesgrant.com, that's also where you go to start your application. When you start your application, you'll be asked who is your referring partner. There's a drop-down menu, and we hope you'll let the folks at Lendistry know that you heard about the grant through Cal Nonprofits. And I want to note that this program is intended to support venues that were in operation prior to COVID. So that would be defined as prior to June 1st, 2019. And our webinar is going to focus today on nonprofits who are seeking one of these grants. But if you're with a business, I recommend you stay with us, because there'll be a lot of information that's relevant for you too. Next slide, please. When you visit the calnonprofits.org website, you'll see this box on the right-hand side, and you click there to access all of our program information for the Venues Grant. You can also make an appointment for individual assistance with me, or you can view recorded webinars, and we'll be having another webinar on November 10th at 2 o'clock. I want to mention that the application for this program is different from standard applications. If you might be applying for other government grants or foundations or corporate grants, one of the big things is that there's no narrative to write, and that significantly cuts down on the prep time for submitting the grant. And so it can be quicker to apply for this grant than some others. Next slide, please. We want to give a brief warning about, unfortunately, there can be fraudsters and scam artists out there. So we want you to know that applying for this grant is completely free. If anybody requests that you pay for anything, don't do it. And throughout the process, you'll receive communications from Lendistry. As Jan mentioned, it's the company that's administering the grant program on behalf of the state of California. And the communications that you'll receive will come from lendistry.com. If you get emails, it will be someone's name at lendistry.com. That's how you can verify that they are legitimate. And Lendistry's website, again, is at cavenuesgrant.com. Once you start your application, you will begin receiving communications from Lendistry, and we strongly recommend that you whitelist lendistry.com, or that you also monitor your junk and spam filters, because sometimes folks miss important communications that don't land in their inbox. Next slide, please. We're going to move now to who is eligible for the program. And we've got a number of slides on eligibility. As I mentioned, there's a lot to learn, but let's start with mentioning that this program is very different from some of the other COVID relief programs that you might be familiar with. For example, on the federal level, we saw the Payroll Protection Program, or PPP, EIDL, and for venues, there was the Shuttered Venues Operators Grant, or SVOG. On the state level, we might also have people in the audience who have received a California relief grant. What I want to say about those other programs is that this one is completely different, particularly for those who are familiar with SVOG. Please don't try to compare the two programs, because that will only lead you to some confusion. It's important to approach the California Venues Grant Program as completely different from SVOG. And because you received one grant or another doesn't really have any bearing on this program. So please do, like I said, read the application guide very carefully. And remember to please go ahead and apply. So turning to who is eligible, we have a list of eligible entities. If you are a nonprofit organization, remember that you have to be a 501c3. If you are a business, you can be arranged in a number of different ways: as a sole proprietor, a C Corp, an S Corp, cooperative, LLC, a partnership, or a limited partnership. I mentioned earlier that you'll need to have been operating in California prior to June 1st, 2019. A note about anyone who may have venues that operate in multiple states: at least 75% of your operations have to be in California in order to be able to qualify for this grant. As I mentioned, this grant is for organizations and businesses that were impacted by COVID, particularly those that had business interruptions or closures as a result of the pandemic. And you have to be able to provide all of the required documents. We'll go over that in just a moment. Next slide, please. And the required documents that you'll be asked for are your state and federal tax returns for 2019 and 2020. And I want to linger there for a moment, because for nonprofit organizations, you'll want to provide your 990s. And a note about state taxes for very small organizations: if you're a small nonprofit under 50,000 in annual income, you don't provide a state tax document. And so what we recommend when you get to that part in the application is to just write a 1-sentence note saying you fall under the requirement, and save that as a PDF, then upload that into your application, where you would put your California tax document, or also known as the 199, that is filed with the Franchise Tax Board. In addition, you'll need at least one of the following: your articles of incorporation, certificate of organization, fictitious name registration, or a government issued business license, and a copy of the driver's license or passport for the person who is named as the applicant in your application. I want to linger there for a moment and talk about who can be named as the applicant. For nonprofit organizations, you file something called the Statement of Information with the Secretary of State's office in California. The Statement of Information will list 3 people who are principals for your organization. Typically, those are board members and might also include the executive director. The person who is named on your application must be listed among those 3 people. If you're familiar with the Statement of Information, you'll know that it also lists your agent for service. The person who is named as the applicant can be the agent for service, but they can't only be listed as the agent for service on the Statement of Information. They also have to appear among those 3 principals. And whoever you name as the applicant is going to need to provide, as we see here, a copy of their personal ID, but also some of their personal information, to include date of birth and social security number. That's unusual for nonprofit organizations applying for a grant. It is required here as a verification of identity. The state has implemented some rigorous identity verification measures and to avoid fraud in the program. And what that information will be used for is what's called a soft credit check. This does not impact an individual's credit. It is not the same as a credit inquiry. However, it is used to verify identity. Next slide, please. And we're going to turn to Tara Gravis now for a moment to walk us through the eligible codes for applicants to the program.
Thank you, Sue. So for this grant, the California Venues Grant Program, they have deemed 7 NACIS codes as eligible codes. You'll see those codes on the screen here. If your organization can comfortably fit within any of those 5, I think I just said 7, those 5 NACIS codes, please do so. One of the common questions we get is, can we apply if we don't have our own facilities? And you'll see that there is a NACIS code for that, for events without facilities. That's 711320. So I just wanted to point that one out. It doesn't matter if you've chosen a different NACIS code for your taxes or for other grant applications. As long as you can comfortably fit with one of these 5 NACIS codes, please move forward with your application. Lendistry understands that, and they'll be taking the time and the effort to review everything to ensure that the spirit of the grant is met.
Thank you. I'll also mention, would you also like to review for us, Tara, about sports teams?
Sure. Sports teams, you'll see here, are eligible as long as they are not professional sports teams. So any kind of a organized club or sports organization that is not professional is allowed to move forward.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned, there are a lot of eligibility criteria, so we've got some more to talk about now. The applicant has to meet some additional eligibility criteria listed here, and that would be as a principal business activity, and that phrase is important. As a principal business activity, organizes, promotes, or produces or manages live concerts, comedy shows, theatrical productions, or other events by performing artists. And that doesn't really mention the sports teams that we just talked about, but that should be included in there too. At an eligible venue, which is defined as a cover charge is charged either through ticketing or at the front door, and the performers are paid. So again, I mentioned that principal business activity. I get some inquiries from folks who are in the arts and may do some performances, but their primary business activity might be in educational programs or in supporting another arts venue. And unfortunately, those would not meet the principal business activity qualification. Next, we have that at least 70% of the earned revenue has to be generated through cover charges or ticket sales, production or promotion fees, or the sale of event beverages, food, and merchandise. So tickets, promotion and production fees, and sales of beverages, food, and merchandise altogether needs to encompass at least 70% of the earned revenue of the organization. And I want to talk about earned revenue for a moment as well. If you're in the application guide, you might see it refers at times to gross earned income. That's a little bit of a red herring for those of us that are used to some more traditional nonprofit accounting terms. It will talk about gross revenue, and that's familiar, but gross earned revenue and earned revenue are the same thing. Earned revenue, you can see by this definition, does not include things like sponsorships or membership fees, etc. It is these things that are listed here on the screen that count toward the earned revenue for purposes of this grant. The other thing that Lendistry will be looking at is the impact of COVID on your business or organization. And the way that they'll do that is you'll be asked to enter in some financial data that will encompass your earned revenue from quarters 2, 3, and 4 in 2019. And that's the calendar year, second, third, and fourth quarter added together. and the same time period in 2020. And what they'll be looking at, like I said, they'll be looking for a revenue decline of at least 70% in 2020 over 2019 as evidence of the impact that COVID has had on your organization or business. The grant awards will be prioritized by those who show the greatest revenue decline as well. So as long as you meet that 70% revenue decline, then you would, in your earned income, you're eligible for a grant potentially. Next slide. More eligibility criteria. An eligible venue is defined as a performance or audience space that uses mixing equipment, a PA system, and a lighting rig. We've gotten some questions from folks who applied for SBOG where the lighting rig was defined in a specific way. That is not the case for the California Venues Grant. So that is the only definition we have, is a lighting rig. And then when you're doing events, you have to employ 2 or more of the following positions: a sound engineer, a booker, promoter, stage manager, security personnel, or box office manager. And for nonprofits with free events, the events must be produced and managed primarily by paid staff. Doesn't have to be exclusively, but primarily paid staff. And that leaves out, unfortunately, some of our organizations that are run exclusively by volunteers. Next slide, please. And then the definition of an eligible live event is making ticket sales available for purchase by the public at least 30 days before the event. And we also noted, however, that cover charges at the door are an eligible activity under the grant guidelines, and that performers are paid. It lists the ways that they can be paid, but it is a standard rate of payment. So performers do need to be paid. We mentioned about earned revenue needing to come from those 4 activities. And again, the entity cannot be a Major League Baseball or other sports team, and it cannot be a minor league team that is owned by a major league team, but it can be other types of sporting events or clubs. Next slide, please. Let's talk for a moment about the entities that are listed as ineligible. So publicly traded corporations or majority owned by a publicly traded corporation, owns and operates entities in more than 5 states or another country, or is owned by a similar entity. We mentioned that you had to have at least 75% of your gross earned revenue happening in California, and that the business also needs to have a physical presence in the state and be headquartered in California. That will be evidenced by your organizing documents and your tax returns. We'll have that address on there. Government entities other than Native American tribes or elected official offices are not eligible. Businesses who are primarily engaged in political or lobbying activities, and businesses who file a Schedule E on their tax returns. And we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to turn to Lucy to say, do we have questions coming in about eligibility?
Yes, we do, Sue. Thank you. Let's see. I know you mentioned the California COVID-19 Relief Grant Program. And
Yes.
folks just want to be clear, if they've gotten one of those grants, can they still apply for this grant?
Absolutely. We'll talk about this later on. There is some impact on the amount that you're eligible for, but you can absolutely apply, and we encourage people to do that.
And I know you're going to get into application information a little bit more, but for those organizations that already have used Lendistry and the portal for the previous grant program, the relief grant program, can they use the same email address, or do they need to use a new one?
They can use the same email address because there will be a different portal for the application, and this is a completely different program, despite that it is being managed by Lendistry as the relief grant was.
Okay. And then that's also true for the federal relief programs. You mentioned the the federal Shuttered Venues program and the PPP. They're also eligible to apply
That's
for.
right. That's
Okay.
right. The programs are completely unrelated. And again, this is a program of the state of California as opposed to those other federal programs that we talked about earlier.
Okay. And then there are some organizations that have multiple venues. They rent space, they don't own their own space, and they're wondering about their eligibility.
The answer is they are eligible. There is no requirement that you own or have a long-term lease on a particular space.
And what if you've been renting venues that are shut down?
Um, the grant requirements say that you either are back in operation or that you have a clear plan to reopen whenever that is possible for you.
Okay. And we're getting a number of questions from organizations that aren't primarily venues, so churches, health organizations. Can you just reiterate the information about where the revenue sources need to come from, the earned revenue, in order to
That's right.
qualify?
The grant requires that 70% of your earned revenue come from those 4 sources, and that would be ticket sales or admission charges, promotion or production fees, and sales of food, beverage, and merchandise. We'll note that many nonprofit organizations also get sponsorships or they might get memberships, and those are not counted as eligible sources of earned income for the purposes of this grant, nor are some of the other things that we might typically put in a nonprofit financial report as earned income, for example, interest income on your bank accounts.
Okay. Does renting out a venue count as earned revenue?
Renting out a venue would be an expense as opposed to revenue.
Okay.
But if you rented a venue and you operated an event there, you can count the ticket sales or the cover charges that you earned in that venue as earned income.
Okay. But what if you own the venue and you're renting it out to other organizations?
Provided that you can meet other eligibility criteria, then yes, you should go ahead and apply.
Okay. And you talked about paid staff. Does that include people under contract? So independent contractors?
It does. There's no requirement that the people that you are paying have to be on staff as employees.
Okay. And then just to reiterate the information about all volunteer organizations. So if you have no full-time employees, are you eligible? So part-time employees would
Part-time
still
employees
qualify.
count. There's no
Okay.
requirement that employees have to be full-time.
Okay. Great. Okay. We may have some other. Oh, I know. Breweries and restaurants. We have a question from a brewery, and I believe they do count if they offer live performances, right?
Yes, if you are charging for those performances, when we talk about restaurants or establishments for serving alcoholic beverages, they are eligible. However, it's not intended for, let's say that a couple times a week, I've got somebody, maybe somebody playing guitar and entertaining the guests, but there's no cover charge. That would not be eligible. However, if you are running shows in your venues where you are selling tickets or have a cover charge, then those are definitely eligible.
Okay. Let's see. I think we've got a couple more. We just wanted a little bit more clarification. So those 5 NACES codes, are they the only ones that count for eligibility?
They are, and especially if you applied for and or received the California Relief Grant, I think it's worthwhile to reiterate about that. If you're a nonprofit organization, some folks are familiar with NACES codes if you've done government contracting or if you have it on a particular schedule on your 990 form. And Lendistry understands that many nonprofits might have multiple activities that they engage in or might comfortably fit under various NACES codes. And so forget about any that you might have used in the past, and please take a close look at those 5 NACES codes that are eligible. And if you can fit comfortably under one of those codes, regardless of what code you may have used in the past, then we encourage you to apply.
Okay. And then we have questions from organizations like youth symphonies, where some of the performers are paid, but the youth involved in the organization are not paid. Would they be eligible if they meet the other eligibility requirements?
We would encourage those organizations to apply. And I don't know if Patrice or Tara want to chime in here, but that is my understanding. Apparently not.
Oh, here comes Tara.
All
I'm
right.
here. Oh, Patrice, you got it? I thought I heard her. Can you repeat the question?
Tara, our question was, the example was a youth symphony orchestra where the professional musicians who might be engaged are paid, but the youth performers are not. Would they still be eligible?
My question would be, that's a great question. I would think yes, but I'd love to hear Patrice's input. I'd also wonder if they're getting a stipend, because I've gotten a few of those questions, and sometimes they tell me that the students are getting a stipend.
But I think we would encourage those folks to go ahead and submit an application, correct?
I do, yes, I definitely would.
Thank you.
I couldn't find the unmute button, but yes, because it
Wait.
does performer, not all the performers. So I would say yes.
Go ahead and apply. Okay, great. Thank you. And I think you answered this question, but we're getting a request to answer it one more time, Sue.
Sure.
If the nonprofit owns the venue and is renting it out to others, does that count as revenue towards the 70%?
I believe that it does. Does anyone on the webinar have a different understanding?
Okay, that sounds
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. But if no performers are paid, is the organization still eligible?
All volunteer productions would not meet some of the qualifications.
What if staff are paid but performers are not?
Again, we have to go back and look at that list of folks we had that list of folks like stage managers and box office managers. We're getting a different opinion in the chat. Jan, let me finish my thought. That there are some positions that need to be paid that are clearly delineated. And Jan, would you like to chime in?
Well, I'm the person who knows least than you and Patrice and everybody, but my pretty clear understanding is that if you have all volunteer performers, that's okay, but you can't if they have paid staff. So, right, there are a lot of companies like that, right? It's like Summer Theater, for example, or is a common example where where the performers are volunteers, but the staff is paid. And that's also true with sports teams sometimes, right? Now, if you have both, and again, the managers here can be part-time. They don't have to be full-time like the people on the list that you mentioned. The problem is you're not eligible if nobody's paid anywhere in sight.
Thank you. All
Great.
right, Lucy, do we have more questions at this time?
Let's keep going. I know that you have a lot of information to cover, and we'll take more questions later.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we get most frequently is, what are the eligible uses of funds for if you receive a grant from this program? And you can see the list here: employee salaries and benefits, overhead and occupancy expenses, any costs associated with reopening, or any COVID-related costs not covered by other programs or grants. And that might be, let's give an example. If you transitioned your performances to online and you had to buy a super duper Zoom account, that would be an example of a COVID-related cost. Or if you had to provide plexiglass or hand sanitizer, things like that. So we don't have an exhaustive exhaustive list of what those costs might be, but that's in the spirit of things. I'm also asked frequently, what are the time frames for the uses of eligible funds? And we don't have information on that from Lendistry. The only guidance that we have is to please retain your records for at least 3 years, which I think most everybody does anyway. And then when you fill out the application, you'll be asked, there'll be a drop-down menu. You'll be asked what the uses of your funds under this grant will be. And we encourage, you'll see the same kind of choices here. We encourage you to choose the one that you think the majority of the funds will be used for. Lendistry knows they may not all be expended in one category. And if you choose something and then later on figure out, well, we'd like to spend it elsewhere on a different eligible cost, that's okay. Next slide, please. And let's talk a little bit about required documents and then also the process for applying. So the application is done completely online. We mentioned that there is no narrative required. So when you log into Lendistry, you'll set up an account and you'll set up a password, and that's where you go to begin your application. We strongly encourage anyone who might want to apply to please at least begin your application prior to November 19th at 5 p.m. No new applications can be completed after that date and time. And as you move through the application, you have the opportunity to save your work and return later. That's not a problem. You don't have to finish it all in one sitting. And when you have completed the online application, filled out all the requested information, and when you have uploaded all of your documents, you then can click a submit button. Lendistry cannot review applications until they are complete and submitted and all of the required documents are provided. But there's a note here that we know that many nonprofit organizations may not yet have their 2020 taxes available. Lendistry has been made aware of this. And so what we suggest that you do is if there's a particular document you don't have available, type out a note saying when you expect it to be available, upload it into that page where the application asks for it. Make sure it's in a PDF form. And all of the documents we'll note have to go into the application as a PDF, with the only exception being a copy of your driver's license or passport, which can be supplied as either a PDF or a JPEG. Additional documents that are required, there is something called the application certification. Some people confuse this with the application. So we want to be very clear that the application is filled out online. The application certification you can obtain from the cavenuesgrant.com website. And when you go to look for that, you will notice that there is a different one for nonprofits than there is for business. So you want to make sure you're choosing the correct one. Again, they'll need all pages of your federal and state tax returns for 2019 and 2020, or an explanation as to when you expect that to be available, your personal ID, financial statements. We mentioned that you'll need to provide statements for the calendar year, quarters 2, 3, and 4 in 2019 and 2020. One of those certifying documents that we talked about earlier. Nonprofits, add in your IRS tax exempt letter and your California Secretary of State filing showing that you were in business prior to June 1, 2019. Again, if you are not able for some reason to complete your application prior to November 19th at 5 p.m., you can still go back in and finish that afterwards. However, there is an advantage to those that are able to provide the complete set of documents and a complete application, because Lendistry will start processing applications right after the application period closes. Next slide, please. This is always the question of the hour. How much can I receive in the grant award? And there is a $250,000 maximum. The maximum award that you are entitled to will be determined by 20% of your gross earned revenue. And remember I mentioned earlier that the guidance talks about gross earned revenue, which is no different than your earned revenue in those categories that we mentioned. So again, it is ticket sales or cover charges, production or promotion fees, and sales of food, beverage, and merchandise. So they'll look at 20% of what you did in 2019 in that category, up to $250,000. If you received a California relief grant, that's already support from the state. So the amount of your relief grant will be deducted from your maximum award. So for example, if you were eligible for the $250,000 maximum, but you've already received a $25,000 California relief grant, that would be deducted and you would be eligible for $225,000 under this program. Please note that earned revenue does not include, once again, contributed income. Next slide, please. We've got a lot of application tips for you, and they are included in the application guide on the Lendistry website, but I want to go over a list of them, some of which are on your screen and some of which I'll merely talk about. On the application, you cannot use a PO box, even if that is the mailing address that you most typically use. Lendistry needs to verify that there is an actual physical address associated with your application. You can use a staff or board home address if you like. You can use the same email address as you did in your relief grant application. We talked about that earlier. And when you provide an email address, please use a standard email address, which is typically somebody's name at your organization. Do not use info at or no reply or have a suffix that's something like contact.com. Those will be screened as spam in the Lendistry system. Some people get confused by the language in the application where it asks who is the owner. The owner is the applicant, and we talked about who that has to be among the 3 principles in the statement of information on file with the Secretary of State's office. We talked about that the applicant will be required to provide their personal data. You will have, this is different from the CRG application because when you get to the end, you will have an opportunity to review what you've entered in there and make any changes before you click on submit if you need to make any changes. After that time, if you need to make changes, you need to contact Lendistry directly to do that. You are not given an opportunity to print out or save your work, so take screenshots if you need that. And one of the most important things is be sure that you're working in Google Chrome as your browser whenever you're interacting with the application. Other browsers like Firefox or Internet Explorer tend to sometimes freeze up or return error messages. So you do want to be in Google Chrome. And if you're having trouble there, there are more tech tips in the application guide. Additionally, the application will ask what is the percentage of ownership. I'm hearing that the field won't accept 0%. So you can put 100%. Lendistry knows that nonprofits don't have owners. You just have to fill out every field or you won't be able to submit your application. And please be on the lookout for communications from Lendistry. You need to respond whenever you receive one of those. You'll also be asked about the number of jobs that you offer and the number of jobs that you have created or might create. And please note that jobs figures should be as of December 31st, 2020. Some of the drop-down menus you'll be asked to choose among will ask you about types of business, and you may not see exactly your organization reflected there. Choose your best, get as close as you can. And Lendistry knows that nonprofits don't necessarily fit neatly into those boxes. You'll also see questions where you're asked to provide demographic information that can either be for the applicant or it can be average information for your board and leadership staff team combined. And we mentioned that you have to submit things in PDF format. When you're titling those documents, please don't use any numbers or special please don't use any special characters like stars or periods. Those will not be accepted by the system. Document uploads are a maximum of 15 megabytes. If your document is larger than that, you can either compress it if you know how to do that, or you can separate it into 2 and label it appropriately. So for example, 990 part 1 and 990 part 2. And we're also recommending that for the financial data that's requested of you, so your gross income in 2019 and 2020 and your earned revenue for those 3 quarters listed in both 2019 and 2020, it's not a bad idea to make a spreadsheet so that that information is clear. Save it as a PDF and upload it with your other documents. And let's move to the next slide. And then we want you to know how it works, how this process works. That we mentioned, you'll create an account and fill out the online application, go on to upload your documents. When Lendistry is reviewing the application, if there's anything missing or they have questions, they will contact you and they may ask for additional information. It's important. They may contact you by email. They may contact you by text. Please do give permission to be contacted by text and provide your cell number. And then remember, please, to answer calls from unfamiliar numbers. We have had people where Lendistry tried many times to reach out to them in the relief grant process, but they weren't answering their phone because they didn't recognize the number. You can also log back into your application whenever you like and monitor your application status. When your application is complete, your status will read awaiting selection process. Let's note that when you are selected, you are not selected for getting the grant yet. You are selected to have your application reviewed. Once that happens, your status will change to in review pending validations. That means simply that they're verifying your information. When your grant is approved, you will receive an email from DocuSign with a grant agreement. And you will also need to link your bank account. That Lendistry does not send paper checks, and the information from your bank account, you will be asked to provide your login credentials. Those go directly to a company called Plaid, which provides secure transaction services for major companies such as Visa, and that is how Lendistry will transfer the grant funds to you when they are awarded. I also frequently get the question about reporting requirements. What will the reporting requirements for this grant be? And the answer is we don't know. We have no guidance on that. Again, we're just asked to share with applicants to please retain your records for at least 3 years. And next slide, please. And Lucy, we'll ask you again, how are the questions in the Q&A box?
Thanks, Sue. Yes, I think it would be really helpful if we could further define what contributed income is. There's some confusion about earned income versus contributed. For example, tuition, sponsorships, grant funding. Are they earned income or are they contributed income?
Those are, for the purposes of this grant, those are contributed income. So they do not count toward the earned revenue for purposes of this grant, which are those categories we mentioned earlier: ticket sales, production fees, and sales of food, beverage, and merchandise.
Okay. And you mentioned that for the California Relief Grant Program, if people got those grants, that amount will be deducted from any grant they get for this program. Is that true for the federal SVOG program as well?
It is not. We'll remember that this is a state program. So the California Venues Grant is a state program and bears no relation to any federal programs, but it does have that relationship to the California Relief Grant Program, which was also a state of California program.
Okay. And then you talked about tax forms in 990s, and I know we've got quite a few questions around fiscal years and which forms. So one of them is, if the tax form has 2019 up at the top but covers 2020 information, is that okay?
It is okay.
Okay, good. Let's see. And then we may have a few more questions about that, but if the principals on the organization's statement of information are no longer part of the organization, do they need to create a new statement of information? What should they do?
Regardless of whether you're applying for this grant or not, you would want to keep that form current with the Secretary of State's office, and it's you can go right online and update it.
Okay, let's see. Okay, and then we have some questions about gross annual and gross earned, that in one question, I believe it's number 10 on the application. Let me find that one. So question 10 asks about both gross earned revenue and gross annual revenue. And the person asking the question just wants to make sure. So it's like, the question is, did the individual or entity have at least a 70% drop in gross earned revenue in California between 2019 and 2020? So, and then under 10, there's an A and a B, where they're asking for gross annual revenue in California in Q2, Q3, Q4 of 2019 and 2020. Can you just clarify that a little bit for folks?
Sure. Let's remember that gross revenue is all of your income sources, and the earned revenue is not our standard terminology in nonprofit organizations. It is those 4 sources that we've mentioned several times. It is the ticket sales or cover charges, the production and promotion fees, and the sale of food, beverage, and merchandise for earned income. And when it's looking at Q2, 3, and 4, that should be from the calendar year, not from your fiscal year.
Okay, and it looks like people are having some technical challenges as they're applying, saying that the form on the owner details page isn't working, that they're not able to enter owner information. And then I think there was also a comment that they were constantly being asked to input bank information. What should folks do if that's
The first thing that you should do is make sure that you're working in Google Chrome as your browser. Some of those errors sound like the kind of errors that get returned if you're working in a different browser. The second thing that you should do is go to the cavenuesgrant.com website and look at the application guide for the tech tips there. It gives you a couple of other things that you can try with your browser. If none of those work, then you'll need to contact Lendistry directly, and we'll have their phone number for this program up in a moment. But it's also available at the bottom of the cavenuesgrant.com website.
okay? Can you explain what is covered under overhead and occupancy expenses?
We don't have a definition for that. However, some of the common things are rent or your mortgage payment. It cannot be a new mortgage. If you're counting a mortgage payment, that mortgage had to have been taken out prior to March 1st, 2020. It might be insurance, utilities, program supplies, etc.
Okay, we have a clarifying statement from Jan here that I just want to share just to make sure that folks have it. So to be clear, we want to make it clear that tuition is maybe earned income in other contexts, but not to qualify you for this program. Is that right, Sue? Just want to make sure.
That is correct. Thank you, Jan.
Okay, good. And then going back to the forms a little bit, we have a question here. So for the 20% of gross earned revenue in 2019, is that what you earned in your calendar year 2019, or what shows up on your tax form, if those are different?
We look at the calendar year.
Okay, good. All right. I think we are doing pretty well. We haven't gotten to all of them, but we have gotten to the vast majority here. So
that's just great. Thank you so much, Lucy.
Yeah.
And if we could have our speaker slide. And we want to say thanks to everybody who's been here with us today. Lucy, who's done a great job monitoring our questions. Jan, thank you very much. And to our closed captioner, Joy, who's with us today. And our tech team, Henry Duong and Vanessa Cruz. And also thank you to our partners from Lendistry, Harshangi and Patrice, and to Tara from Californians for the Arts. And I'll turn it over to Jan to take us out.
Thanks, Sue. You stole my script. I thought I was going to get to thank those people. So I'll just limit myself to thanking you and Lucy.
And maybe we could get that last slide up.
On the last slide, please. That's great. And so that
one more.
Yeah. But Sue can be reached by telephone. An actual person answers the phone, and by email. So I would really encourage you, if you have a question, instead of guessing, like what did I remember or something like that, you should go ahead and reach out to her. I also just wanted to say, next slide, that one of the reasons that we can provide things like this at no cost, as well as a lot of other things that we do, is because we have the support of 10,000 nonprofit members. And I really want to hope that you'll consider becoming a Cal Nonprofits member, and in addition to kind of contributing to the work we do supporting the entire nonprofit community, we also have great health and dental vision, health, dental, and vision insurance, great property insurance, the whole fire insurance thing. We're on that. It's very complicated, as many of you in wildland areas know. So I just want to give a plug for that. And we do have one more webinar coming up on this on November 10th. At least so far, we haven't scheduled more than that. So if you feel like you want to come back, or this will be recorded too, so you have friends, let them know about it. And I do just really want to say one more time, let people know about this, okay? Because there hasn't been very much time between the announcement and the program. So we all need to kind of do our part to make sure that as many people take advantage of this program as we can. Okay, thanks everybody. It's 3:27. We're going to give you 3 minutes left to get, have a blast during the 3 minutes. Okay, bye everybody.